Hello and welcome back to our limited set review of the Brothers War. Today we're doing the uncommon artifacts as our part 2 of the set review. In part 1 we go over our common artifacts, so if you haven't viewed that already, check out the link up above, but we'll get into the uncommon artifacts now. Up first we have Haywire Might. For 1 colorless mana you get a 1/1 artifact creature insect. It has when Haywire Might dies, you gain 2 life. Pay a green, sacrifice it, exile target non-creature artifact or non-creature enchantment. It's a little hard to judge this guy because I haven't seen how many enchantments are in this set yet, but this feels like a good, decent rate removal. Only going to go with a C- at first because it can't remove creatures, but I'll give it a C-. Up next, we have Mishras Research Desk. For a colorless mana, you get an artifact that has 1 and tap it, sacrifice Mishra's Research Desk, exile the top 2 cards of your library, choose one of them. Until the end of your next turn, you may play that card. It has Unearth for 1 and a red, which means that you can bring this back from your graveyard to the battlefield, exile at the beginning of your next end step, or if it would leave battlefield, and you can only do that as a sorcery. So, this is a more expensive but better divination. It's nice that you pay the added costs in individual chunks, but you do get to ultimately get 2 cards out of your choice of 4, and I like that quite a bit. I'm going to give this a C playable. Up next, we have Spectrum Sentinel. For a 1 colorless mana, you get a 1/2 artifact creature soldier. It has protection from multicolored. Whenever a non-basic land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, you gain a life. So this is a decent rate and a decent blocker, especially against multicolored permanents. But it'll likely gain a couple points of life over the course of the game. But it's not high enough impact to pull it out from the filler category. Maybe after I see all the multicolored cards, I'll come up a bit on it, but I'm going to give this a D+. Up next, we have Yoshin Frontliner. It's 1 colorless mana for a 1/1 artifact creature soldier. Whenever Yoshin Frontliner attacks, another target creature you control gets +1/+1 until end of turn. It has Unearth for a white. So this is another decent rate. If this set rewards you for having a lot of small creatures, I can see this being a higher grade, but it's not impactful enough to warrant more than filler for now, so I'm going to give it a D+. Up next, we have Astros Harvester. For 2 colorless, you get a 3/1 artifact creature construct. Whenever Astros Harvester attacks, exile target card from a graveyard. Unearth for 1 and a black. I like the 3 power on a 2 mana cost card. It seems like you'll really want more than 1 toughness, though, as there's quite a few creatures in the set that have 1 power. The Unearth is nice, especially on a high power creature, and that makes this playable. Removing a card from the graveyard makes it even more of a solid playable because you can remove, for instance, an Unearth card from your opponent's graveyard. So this, I think, is just a solid playable at C. Up next, we have Levitating Statue. And for 2 colorless, you get an artifact with flying. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Levitating Statue, and then you can pay 2 colorless to make it become a 1/1 construct artifact creature until end of turn. So in a spell deck, this can get pretty big. I don't like that you have to spend 2 mana each time you want to make it a creature, but in a spell deck, this will be decent. I'm going to give it a Synergy C-. I could see myself coming up on this if I see more spells throughout the set as we get into the other colors, but Synergy C- for now. Up next, we have Mask of the Jade Crafter. For 2 colorless, you get an artifact with pay X, tap it, sacrifice Mask of the Jade Crafter. Create an XX colorless golem artifact creature token. Activated only as a sorcery, and has Unearth for 2 and a green. So this is card advantage because you get your XX twice with the Unearth, but you pay a decent amount for that, both upfront and with the Unearth cost in order to get there, and I don't like how expensive that is. I think it's a decent playable card, though. It scales with the game as you can make it, again, XX. And you can do that twice. I think it's a solid playable at C. Up next, we have Thran Power Suit, which is a 2-mana artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each aura and equipment attached to it, and it has Ward 2 and has Equip 2. So keep in mind, at default, this is a 1/1 because it counts itself in the aura and equipment. And so by itself, it's kind of like an expensive short sword that also gives Ward 2. But the power of short sword itself is really in the cheap cost for it for aggro decks. And this is just getting a little too expensive. You are paid off for playing some more equipment. We'll have to wait to see on the auras. But these cards generally aren't worth a card. I'm going to give this a D as filler. Up next, we have Reconstructed Thopter. For 3 Colorless, you get a 2/1 artifact creature Thopter with flying and Unearth 2. I would like more upside for my 3-mana card than a 2/1 flyer that happens to be able to Unearth. It's fine, but I really have to put this in the category of filler. And with that, I think it's on the higher end of filler, though. You'll play this a decent amount of the time, but I think this will be a D+ for grade. Up next, we have Transmogrent Altar. For 3 colorless, you get an artifact that has black, tap, sacrifice a creature, add 3 colorless mana. 2 and tap, sacrifice a creature, create a 3/3 colorless zombie artifact creature token. Activate only as a sorcery. So this makes me want to transform my small creatures into something more useful. And it pulls me into doing that. It costs a card to get that ability. This by itself doesn't do anything besides give you the ability to do these to the other creatures. So it doesn't impact the board itself, and you pay a decent amount of mana to transform these things. But I think we have our first pull-in card. I'm going to give this a B-. I think this is a slight pull-in into using your small creatures to make them bigger, and into ramping into your very powerful huge creatures, which we'll be seeing a lot of at the end of this review here in Uncommon Artifacts. B- it is there. Up next, we have Slagstone Refinery. For 4 colorless, you get an artifact with whenever Slagstone Refinery or another non-token artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield or is put into exile from the battlefield, create a tapped Power Stone token. So that's a artifact token that you can tap it to add a colorless, but it can't be used to cast non-artifact spells. It can be used for any other purposes, including activated abilities, etc. So we're seeing support for Artifact Ramp. That's clearly a theme in the set. I'm not normally in for a card like this because it doesn't impact the board itself, but I believe the synergies in the set will make it playable. With that, I'm going to give this a Synergy C-. It's not a card that I'm actively excited about, but I do think this will fuel your ramp and some of your artifact decks into some of these big cards we have coming up. Up next, we have Symmetry Matrix. For 4 colorless, you get an artifact with whenever a creature with power equal to its toughness enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 1. If you do, draw a card. Remember, for cards like this, to think about the fact that it itself does not impact the battlefield, and how soon are you actually going to be getting the benefit? So, and how much of a benefit is this? You really need this to hit 3 times for it to be worth it. If you think about it, Divination is pay 3, get 2 cards immediately. This is pay 4, and then pay an extra 1, and maybe get some cards down the line. And you really need to activate this 3 times or more for it to be worth it. With that, this is really just filler, and bad filler at that. I give this a D-. You want your card draw other ways. Up next, we have Steel Exemplar. For 5 colorless mana, you get a 4/4 artifact creature wizard. It has Trample. Steel Exemplar enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it, unless 2 or more colors of mana were spent to cast it. Okay, so you need to cast this with Colorless, and you need to cast this with all one color otherwise, basically. So in this set, you get a lot of things that make colorless mana. So I think we'll be able to cast this as a 5 mana 6/6 trample fairly reliably, and because of that, it can be above rate a good amount of the time. When it's under rate, it's not that bad though. So I think this is on the high end of your playables. It doesn't draw me into playing anything special, but C+ for the grade it is. Up next, we have our Gideon Adventure. For 6 colorless, you get a 5/5 artifact creature shapeshifter. Pay 1 until end of turn. Our Gideon Adventure gets -1/-1 and gains your choice of Flying, Vigilance, Death Touch, or Haste. Now, this is so flexible that I love cards like this. I'm always happy to play in any deck, and if I need to hit them quickly with haste, I can do that. The next turn I can fly over them. I can make it Vigilance if I'm ever scared about attacking out towards them and getting the rebound effect to make me lose the game. I love that flexibility. This draws me into this card. I'm going to put this at a B- for grade. Up next, we have Cradle Clear Cutter. For 6 colorless, you get a 3/6 artifact creature golem with prototype of 2 and a green, and it's a 1/3. Tap it to add an amount of green equal to Cradle Clear Cutter's power. So this is the first time we're seeing prototype in part 2. We saw it in our comments in part 1. Prototype is basically a reduced casting cost where if you pay that, it comes into the battlefield, and it is, while it's on the battlefield, that color, that cast converted mana cost of the prototype one. And it has the same abilities as the card, but it's typically reduced power and toughness. So as a prototype card, this is fine. I really would like to use this at 6 mana to ramp into my 9 and 10 mana stuff the next turn. So I'm really looking to try to play this as a 6-cost creature. But sometimes when you don't have any other good plays on turn 3, or, it's not the worst thing in the world on turn 3 to have a 1/3 defender that can also ramp you into the next turn. So I love flexibility. I love these prototype cards. I am going to give this one a synergy grade, though, because I think you really only want this if you're taking that ramp strategy. But I'll give this a synergy C+. I think this is a card that will be a staple of helping you ramp into your bigger creatures. Up next, we have Combat Thresher. For 7 colorless, you get a 3/3 artifact creature construct. Has prototype for 2 and a white, and it's 1/1. It has double strike, and when it enters the battlefield, draw a card. I love 3 mana cards that, when they come into play, say draw a card. The early things that help smooth you out into getting a land, possibly getting a land when you need it, possibly getting a spell when you need it. Drawing cards early while affecting the battlefield is powerful, and we've seen that over the history of Limited in most sets, and this is kind of our version of it in this set. So this flexibility, again, it's double strike, so having a 1/1 double striker for 3 that when it comes to the battlefield draws you a card, I'm all for that. And it's flexible enough that late in the game, it's a 3/3 double striker that draws you a card for 7. I'm in for that. I'm giving this the highest grade I've given any card in the set so far. I'm in this for a B. I think this is a solid, brings me into playing white and playing this card. Up next, we have Heavyweight Demolisher. For 7 colorless, you get an 8/6 artifact creature construct with Menace. At the beginning of your upkeep, tap Heavyweight Demolisher unless you pay 3. It has Unearth for 6 red. So this is very expensive for what you get, but in a ramp strategy, you'll probably have the mana to get there and want payoffs like this. You might be able to find them elsewhere, though. You only want this for the ramp strategy, and that's it. So I'm going to also give this a synergy grade, but I'll give this a synergy C. I think it's a playable, when you want to ramp into this, you'll want this to pay you off in the end. Up next, we have Craw Crusher. For 7 colorless, you get a 4/6 artifact creature worm. Has prototype 2 and green. It's a 2/5. Whenever Craw Crusher attacks, target attacking creature gets +X/+O until end of turn, where X is Craw Crusher's power. So this is a decent rate on both the prototype and the normal version, and it's flexible in the mid to the late game. I love flexibility, like I said, on prototype cards. So I think this is a higher end playable. I'm going to give this a C+. Up next, we have Falaji Dragon Engine. For 8 colorless, you get a 5/5 artifact creature dragon. It has prototype for 2 and a red, and it's a 1/3 in that case. It has flying, and it has pay 2 Falaji Dragon Engine gets +1/+O until end of turn. So this is an early and late game flexible card. I mentioned the prototype. I prefer them to have an option for turn 3 or earlier as a prototype, and then late game having the big payoff. And I like my late game finishers to have evasion. This does. That brings this card up a lot for me. And I especially like them to have pump at the end, so I can go in for a couple swings, pump them up, and win the game. They're truly finishers in that sense. It's possible I'm biased because of the lore I'm migrating. I read through the Brothers War earlier this year, and I love the storyline for it. And Falaji Dragon Engine is a big driver into Mishras' whole thing that he's doing. So I just love the lore of this card as well. But I'm going to give this a B-. I think this is enough to pull me into wanting to go big in red and finish them off. B- is my grade. Up next, we have Spotteropter. For 8 colorless, you get a 4/5 artifact creature Thopter. It has prototype for 3 and a blue, and it's a 2/3 in that case. It has flying. When Spotteropter enters the battlefield, scry X, where X is its power. So in prototype, it's scry 2. Later on, it's scry 4. So this is a decent rate for both sides of the card. Scry 2 is slightly worse than drawing a card, but it's comparable. And the flexibility really stacks your deck in the late game. So I wish this was more of a true finisher in and of itself. Yes, it has evasion, but just getting through with 4 damage each turn after you're paying 8 mana to get this isn't quite enough of a true finisher in my mind. It's more about stacking your deck to hopefully get to something to help you finish. But I do think this is a decent card with the prototype flexibility. I'll give this a solid playable. I think this is a C. Up next, we have the Sushi Cave Guard. Sushi Cave Guard. I'm not sure how you say that. But it was also the Sushi was another staple in the Brothers War. Anyhow, this is an 8/8 for 8. You get an artifact creature construct with vigilance and ward 4. When Sushi Cave Guard dies, add 8 colorless mana. Until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. Alright. I don't like that this card doesn't have evasion. We just talked about finishers. I like having trample or flying or something like that. But it will be hard to kill because you have to do it with creatures or some kind of removal that you're still paying 4 mana on top of to kill this. So even when your opponent does kill this too, it sets you up for having the mana to play something else big after that. So you can hopefully, if you have another threat, be able to deploy that. I wish this was more a finisher in and of itself though, so I think among our giant creatures, this has one of the lower ratings. I'm going to give this a C-. I think this is on the lower end of playable. And lastly, we have Hulking Metamorph. For 9 colorless, you get a 7/7 artifact creature shapeshifter. It has prototype for 2 blue. In that case, it's a 3/3. You may have Hulking Metamorph enter the battlefield as a copy of an artifact or creature you control, except it's an artifact creature in addition to its other types, and its power and toughness are equal to Hulking Metamorph's power and toughness. Alright, so at 4 mana, I like having a 3/3 creature that can take the abilities of whatever your best creature is on the battlefield. That's a good rate in and of itself. And I love that down the line, I can make it a 7/7 that does the same thing. That flexibility is great. I think those are both great rates. This is among one of the best of the big creatures that we've discussed. In fact, I'm giving it, along with it, tied for the highest grade I've given so far this session. I'm going to give this a B. I think this is a pull into blue and playing these big creatures. So that's all for the uncommons. I'll cover the rares and mythics all together later in a later version of this. Up next, I will go through the multicolored in the next session, and then through each of the colors. I actually probably will cover lands even before that, because kind of lesson learned from Dominaria United, the lands tell you a lot about the set and what you're going to be able to cast. So it's good to cover those. So yeah, we'll get into lands and multicolored next. Thanks everyone. See you next time.